everyone, and welcome to another episode of Traditionally Speaking. My name's Tom, and together with my friend Joe, we're going to be talking about a topic that we know is dear to many hearts, gingerbread houses.
Ooh, gingerbread I love gingerbread. Gingerbread men, gingerbread houses, gingerbread anything. Of course, there's so many kinds, isn't there, Tom?
Oh, there certainly are. It's huge in Europe. I know we'll discuss that later, but it's one of those things where every country has its own tradition, and there are very subtle differences in flavour and consistency.
Speaking of traditions, how did it all start? I think it started over in Europe, didn't it?
Well, that's a very interesting question because legend has it that it was the fourth gift given to the Christ child by the Magi or wise men. And the idea is that in addition to the gold and the frankincense and the myrrh that we associate with the Christmas story, that gingerbread was the fourth gift. And the story behind this is that there was a fourth wise man who didn't have good health and wasn't able to make the journey from Babylon to Israel. So he was tended by a rabbi in his poor health. And as a gift to the rabbi for taking care of him, he gave him the gift of gingerbread, the recipe for gingerbread. And the tradition of the gingerbread house comes from that same legend because the rabbi had suggested that a house be built from the gingerbread because Bethlehem, where Christ was born, stands for house of bread.
Really?
So that's where the story starts.
Good heaven. I knew gingerbread was old. We have our gingerbread obviously coming from Europe, especially like Germany. But I had no idea it dated that far back to the Christ child himself. Man, that's amazing.
But we have to fast forward around a millennium before you have gingerbread being baked in Europe. And it's thought, according to food historians, that it came from sort of spiced bread, which was traditionally made in the Middle East, being brought back to Europe after the Crusades. And it's difficult to say exactly who was responsible for this, but some people say it's St. Gregory of Nicopolis, who lived in France, and he allegedly taught how to bake gingerbread to the priests in France before he died in the 10th century. So that's kind of where we believe gingerbread got its origins in Europe.
Now, when they baked it, did they just take it out to the masses, or did they keep it within the monasteries, or how did it take off the way it did? Because boy, I'll tell you, gingerbread is in every corner of the world, as near as I can tell.
Well, the big place that's seen as being the epicenter of gingerbread making is Germany, and it's thought that monks were making it in Germany as early as the 13th century. Now, the famous form of German gingerbread is called Lebkuchen, and that certainly was being baked as early as sort of 1296, I think. And certainly by 1395, they were making it in Nuremberg, which is now seen as being the gingerbread capital of the world, because they actually had skilled gingerbread bakers who did nothing but make gingerbread. So, I mean, by that point, you're starting to see spices used in the gingerbread. You have things like cloves, cinnamon, cardamom, and nutmeg.
Cardamom, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And by the 15th century, you're starting to see things like gingerbread figurines and the traditional gingerbread man.
Now, and that brings up another interesting thing. Normally, the gingerbread in Europe is a much harder consistency. It's almost more like we would call a cookie than a bread. You guys do a different gingerbread, don't you, in Scotland?
That's very true, actually. It's one of those things that varies very much depending on what area of Europe it's made. In Germany, the Lebkuchen gingerbread is very popular. You sometimes see it coated in chocolate. You sometimes see it with a layer of things like cherry or orange, perhaps. Sometimes apricot. So there are those kind of aspects of it, but also it's a much softer consistency than the kind of gingerbread that you would traditionally buy in the UK. Here, it's much more like a kind of ginger biscuit, so it's much harder. Still pleasant to eat, of course, but if you're making a gingerbread house out of it, it's probably easier to make because it has that slightly harder consistency.
Now, here we do gingerbread, everything, of course, the most popular being gingerbread men and gingerbread gals. But also, of course, gingerbread houses, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But do you guys make all different kinds of shapes and sizes, and do you hang them on your trees and do different things with that?
Oh, definitely. I mean, gingerbread's quite popular all through the year, and certainly you get gingerbread men all the way, through the seasons.
Really?
Um,
Yeah,
oh yeah, absolutely.
strictly a Christmas thing around here that I've seen.
As you say, it's a tradition with a very long history. In the 17th century, for instance, if you were in Europe, you had to be a professional gingerbread baker and be, certified to bake gingerbread, with the exception being Christmas and Easter, when anyone was allowed to make it in their homes. But
So you weren't able to just decide to whip up a batch of gingerbread if it was, the middle of summer?
no, no, that's something that's come, in more recent centuries. But they took it very seriously back then. However, it's one of those things that, as the centuries progressed, more and more people were shaping the gingerbread into different forms. They were starting to add things like iced patterns or gold leaf. And actually, in some countries, people would use gingerbread as a talisman, or something that was seen as a charm that would protect them against evil spirits. So there's a long history.
So how would they protect them against evil? You put it under their pillow or put it in their room or?
Well, that's the interesting thing because people would wear it around their neck like it was a necklace.
Really?
Um, yeah, yeah, but
So kind of like the vampire and garlic thing, huh?
exactly the same. Yeah, exactly the same idea.
Isn't that interesting? And that would ward off evil spirits.
Yeah. But as a result of all those old traditions, it started to become almost like a popular art form now. That people are using gingerbread as carvings or as little buildings and things, as well as the traditional gingerbread house that we enjoy at Christmas time.
And speaking of gingerbread houses, boy, in the US, leave it to us to take it to the nth degree. We have an annual gingerbread competition, and it is nationally known. And I'll tell you, they have it every year at the Omni Grove Park Inn in Asheville, North Carolina. And the tremendous amount of talent and the tremendous variety of houses that are built and how they're built. There's an entire science behind it in the US. And I'll tell you, the Omni one is an important one because you can win a cash prize. I think last year they gave away somewhere around $25,000 to the various winners. Although the ribbon is the more prized item. Boy, if you win a Grove Park Inn gingerbread contest, you're considered at the very tip top of your game. So, but it's fascinating, and they allow people to view these for about 12 days during that. But boy, I'll tell you, you have to have a certain kind of gingerbread, certain kind of icing to hold it together. And there's a whole science behind this. And I'll tell you, I think I could build a regular house easier than these people build a gingerbread house. Now, do you guys have anything like that at all in Scotland?
It's interesting because the idea of shaped gingerbread men is thought to go back to the Tudor court, and it goes all the way back to Elizabeth I, because there is historical documentation that at Christmas time, she would make little gingerbread figures of the guests who'd come to stay at court with her. There were all sorts of Christmas traditions that go back to the Tudors, and I know that we'll be talking about that in some of the later episodes and things like, for instance, mince pies. But they reckon that's probably where the tradition started in the UK. And as a result, we now have gingerbread houses as well, various different kits that you can get, or people can build them entirely themselves. But the big breakthrough, it's thought, comes in the 19th century, and that is when Hansel and Gretel comes out, the old fairy tale.
Is that where that story came from?
Yep, absolutely. That's where they believe the story of the gingerbread house was popularized and eventually became a Christmas tradition, not just in Germany, but right across the whole of Europe.
Well, I wonder how many of our listeners actually build gingerbread houses or make gingerbread men and stuff. As you said that you basically have gingerbread all year round, I really only see it around the Christmas holidays and not too much after that. I mean, obviously some people bake it, but you don't see it like you do other types of cookies and biscuits around here. So, but it's still popular all year round in your country, huh?
Yeah, because they do believe, a lot of historians certainly believe, that the big epicenter of gingerbread initially in North America was Pennsylvania, because there was a large number of German immigrants there. And it was because of them it started to gain popularity as a Christmas tree decoration.
It's amazing. And, and of course, Germany is also the reason why we have Christmas trees. That's another tradition that started there. And boy, are we going to have a long podcast on that one? So, but I'd be interested to hear from our listeners. Do you make gingerbread, and do you make the hard gingerbread, or do you make the more like honey gingerbread, which is more soft and pliable and easier to build houses with, or a combination? Love to hear some interesting stories about gingerbread houses and what some of our listeners do about this. This is such a fascinating subject. And here again, it's amazing how one thing coming out of Germany has spread so rapidly throughout the whole world. Because, well, and of course, that came over with the spices. I mean, that's when we started working with things like you had mentioned earlier, the cinnamon and cardamom and different spices to create gingerbread.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because the number of people I speak to who really love gingerbread and love to cook it, everyone seems to have a slightly different way of doing it. They have their own favorite flavors or their own little extra something that they like to add to their recipe. And I think that's a wonderful thing, because it really helps to personalize it and, adds that little extra something to it.
And of course, at the holidays, it's always fun to have the kids help you decorate the gingerbread men or gingerbread women, and to bake these cookies with them and help cut them out and what have you. I mean, that's a tradition again that we just love to see every year, and I certainly enjoy finding a plate of gingerbread cookies when I visit your home. So, any other thoughts on this, Tom?
Yeah, only to say that, the wonderful thing about gingerbread, particularly for people who are sort of cultural historians, is the fact that there are so many different traditions that are connected with it all the way across Europe. In Sweden, for instance, people will prepare their gingerbread house on St. Lucy's Day. And yet in Norway, it tends to be something that is right the way through December. And they have what's known as the pepperkakebayen, which is Norwegian for the gingerbread village. And you tend to find that that's something that is a tradition there. People can add their own gingerbread house to the gingerbread city.
So is that kind of like a festival that goes on?
Yeah, that's right. If you're a child under the age of 12, you can make a house and you can add it to the gingerbread community there in Norway. So, I mean, that's been a tradition there for a long time.
Oh, wow. Do a lot of people take part in that?
I think so, yeah. I mean, it seems to be a huge thing in Norway, and it's one of those things, I guess, that has become popular. The Paparkakebyen apparently is the world's largest gingerbread city, but I'm sure there are lots of other places that would like to rival their crown.
Now, when you talk about gingerbread city, I mean, does like every shop make their own gingerbread or have their own variation?
Well, as far as I know, there are all sorts of different additions that are being made. I mean, I guess organizations and companies as well as individuals. But let's not forget, of course, that this is exactly the same in North America. You have in San Francisco, you have those two great hotels, the Fairmont and the St. Francis Hotel, and they always have a hugely elaborate gingerbread house every Christmas season. Famously they rival each other to see who's going to have the most impressive one.
And there have been some massive houses and some massive gingerbread men made. I think the Guinness World Record is actually held in Oslo, Norway, and it was a 1,400-pound gingerbread man, and it was baked all at once in what had to be just an enormous oven. I think it was like 24 feet long. So yeah, you can do amazing things with gingerbread. So, and I'd love to hear again from our listeners. How do you use gingerbread? And do you make houses every year, or do you go visit contests? I know a lot of churches out here will have local contests as well on that. So there's another tradition that we love to see every year, and it's kind of fun. And if you ever do get the chance to visit Asheville, North Carolina in November, you definitely should put the Omni Grove Park Inn on your list of things to visit. Mary and I saw it one time, and we were just blown away by the intricacy and the variety of these gingerbread houses and just the tremendous amount of work that goes into them. So it's certainly something to put on your bucket list to see.
It must be said, while we've discussed Norway having their annual tradition of a gingerbread village, it would be remiss of me not to mention that it's the USA that holds the Guinness record for the largest gingerbread village baked by a single person. And that is the executive sous chef at the New York Marriott Marquis Hotel, who's a gentleman called John Lovitch. And he was responsible for building a village with 135 residential and 22 commercial buildings. And that has been currently displayed at the New York Hall of Science, and it's been recognized now, I think, as being the Guinness World Record holder.
Well, and I was a lot smaller than that, but I was going to mention the one that's done at the White House every year. Every year they build an elaborate gingerbread house in the White House, which everybody loves to see and is filmed often and put on the like YouTube and different channels. So you should look those up as well. Some beautiful structures, and boy, that is just amazing. How many buildings?
135 residential buildings and 22 commercial buildings, but that's not including the train and the cable car.
Oh, good heavens. Oh, good heavens. And I thought I did a lot with the porcelain Department 56 buildings. Man, that's well, just goes to show you, how inventive people can get when you were talking about food. Of course, who would ever eat or want to eat or even take a piece of one of those once they're built? Too pretty to break apart.
Absolutely. I mean, some of these are just the most incredibly well designed and beautifully decorated structures, and you wouldn't want to eat them.
And again, I mentioned YouTube, but I invite our listeners to go on YouTube and look up the competition at the Grove Park Inn, because boy, I'll tell you, you would see some amazing gingerbread homes or houses that were done for this competition, and it's just, man, it's just incredible. So, Well, I'll tell you, you've made me hungry. I think I'm going to go have a couple chocolate chip cookies now.
Well, that's the amazing thing, isn't it? Because it's one of those things you can enjoy eating it, you can enjoy building with it. There's just no end to what you can do with gingerbread.
And again, things to do with the kids. Oh, kids love to bake. And boy, I'll tell you, making like gingerbread men. And again, you can hang these on your tree. I'd let them dry for at least 24 hours, but you can hang them on your tree. You can decorate your house with them. There's all kinds of fun things that the kids would really enjoy doing. So if you haven't started making gingerbread as a tradition every year, I strongly recommend you try it. Not to mention, if you need some help getting rid of them, just give Tom and I a call. We'll come by.
Yes, indeed. Yes, because I would recommend that anyone check out all the different traditions of gingerbread through the centuries, because you never know what you might want to add to your own list of Christmas traditions.
And that's what we're all about here at Traditionally Speaking. Well, Tom, this has been a lot of fun. And boy, I'll tell you, I hope to hear some comments from our listeners and find out some more things that we didn't know. Because as you said, this dates all the way back to the Christ child. That just blows me away. So that's just amazing. But certainly do stay tuned for more podcast topics like this, and you're going to learn a lot about some of our traditions and where they came from, and it might just surprise you. So so thanks for joining us once again.
Yes, thank you very much, everyone, for coming along, and thank you for listening. It's been great to be with you today.
And make sure you tune in for our next podcast. You never know what we're going to talk about next. Take care, everyone. God bless.
Thank you, Joe, and thanks everyone for tuning in. Speak to you soon.